This week, 100 years ago, was the week of the Easter Uprising in Ireland, a pivotal point in Irish history. But that's not my hook today. Instead, we made a whole special episode about it so I can look at it a little deeper. But something else happened this week 100 years ago that still has major repercussions today. 100 years ago, the Allies were planning to divide up the Middle East after the war. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the spring floods had come, and the scattered action on the Eastern Front was mostly in small boats, since the rivers had burst their banks and the roads were non-existent. Flooding on the Tigris had also helped prevent the British relief force from reaching the British army under siege in Kut. And in Anatolia, the Russians had taken Trabzon from the Turks, while sending nearly 20,000 men to fight on the Western Front, where the Battle of Verdun was now 2 months old. I want to look at some naval stuff for a minute first this week. Last year, Sir John Jellicoe, commander of the British Grand Fleet, was worried that small German naval successes, U-boat warfare, and the need to send part of his fleet to secondary theaters of the war was slowly eroding British naval superiority. Near the end of the year, the ratio of British to German dreadnoughts had sunk to 17 to 15, down from 20 to 13 months before, and that of battle cruisers was only 5 to 4. But by now, the balance had swung back towards Britain's favor. The end of Gallipoli, the addition of the Italian fleet to the Mediterranean operations, and the destruction of German raiding cruisers had now made clear that the Grand Fleet had superiority. I read in John Keegan's The First World War that this month it had 31 dreadnoughts and 10 battle cruisers, while the German high seas fleet had only 18 dreadnoughts and 5 battle cruisers. The British also had a big advantage in light cruisers and destroyers. So it made sense to adopt a passive policy by which the Navy would justify its existence simply by causing the German Navy to protect its harbors. But German naval pride did not allow Germany the passive option. And in Germany, the Navy was junior to the Army and not senior like it was in Britain. And this was a time of great German bloodletting in the Army. The German Navy needed to gain the esteem of the German people. And Admiral Reinhard Scheer made clear that the Navy needed action. And he had been sending the fleet out looking for it. And this week, he got it. On April 25th, the day after German naval forces bombarded Lowestoft and Yarmouth, came a battle between Zeppelins, battle cruisers, and submarines on the German side, and destroyers, land batteries, airplanes, and seaplanes on the British side. The airplanes and seaplanes had flown up to attack the Zeppelins that were heading west and flying high. The Zeppelins turned out to sea, and the planes followed, bringing them within range of the naval guns. 4 U-boats then appeared and began firing at one of the planes. One of the airplanes was actually destroyed by fire from a Zeppelin, and 2 seaplanes were damaged by fire from the subs. That sounds pretty mundane, but the timing of this, coming on the heels of the Irish Easter Uprising, caused a lot of concern and also big anti-German anger in civilian Britain, but showed that as long as the Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow blocked off the exit from the North Sea, German operations would be hit and run against targets close enough to run from to home before the big ships of the British could head south and intervene. And intervening is something the Allies were quite good at. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, named after Englishman Sir Mark Sykes and Frenchman Georges Picot, was signed April 26, 1916, although some sources say May 9th and others say May the 16th. But this was a secret agreement between Britain and France, with Russian approval, which divided the Middle East between them. France would control Lebanon, with a capital at Beirut. There would be a sovereign Arab state in Syria based around Damascus, which would still be under French protection. Britain would be in charge of the port of Haifa and the city of Accra, controlling the bay that would make it a Mediterranean terminal for Mesopotamian oil. Palestine would be under protection of Britain, France, and Russia combined. France would get southeastern Turkey and northern Iraq. Britain would also get southern Iraq, and Russia, Istanbul, and the Armenian regions of Anatolia. The map was divided pretty much with straight lines. 100 years later, this agreement still defines many of the conflicts of the region. It defined the borders of Syria and Iraq, certainly helped precipitate the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and was a big turning point in Western Arab relations, since it, in advance, negated all of the promises Britain would make to Arabs for an Arab homeland in Greater Syria. ISIS has even claimed that one of their goals is to reverse the effects of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which would be made public in 1917 to the great consternation of the Arab world. But all that had to happen for it to go into effect was to defeat the Ottoman Empire. Thing is, the Ottoman Empire was far from being defeated, as they were showing in Mesopotamia. On April 27th, 3 British officers, including Captain T.E. Lawrence, soon known as Lawrence of Arabia, offered the Ottomans £2 million in gold to allow the besieged British and Indian troops at Kut to go free and rejoin their comrades. The Turkish commander replied, "Your gallant troops will be our most sincere and precious guests." Russian troops were driving west from Persia, from the Pathé Pass, trying to reach Kut, but were still 150 kilometers from Baghdad, and by the 28th, Kut was finally out of food. And looking just a bit to the west, we see some developments at the Suez Canal. Last month, General Sir Archibald Murray had taken command of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, the EEF, which had been put together from some of the leftovers from Gallipoli, which had finally ended as the new year was getting going. By this summer, the EEF would number 4 infantry divisions, a cavalry force, and the Imperial Camel Corps, a corps that would number 1 British battalion, 1 New Zealand, and 2 Australian. Now, it was over a year since the Turks had tried to attack the Suez Canal, but Murray thought that an active defense was his best bet anyhow. So he planned an advance to the coastal town of El Arish, from where his men could disrupt any Turkish movement through the Sinai Desert. The main issue was, as you may guess, water supplies. So this month, Murray had secured the oasis region between Katia and Bir el Abd, and had sent small forces out to destroy the Turkish water supply points they had used in early 1915, which would limit any future Turkish desert operations. Finally, learning something from their mistakes in Mesopotamia last year, the British wanted to have a secure communications line back to the Nile Delta. But how do you create a transport infrastructure in such desert territory? Well, there was actually a simple solution: wire roads. Yep, wire roads. Ordinary wire netting was simply unrolled to make a road that prevented soldiers from sinking into the sands when they marched. Clever. But the railway was the only way for a larger force to travel, and it went out to Romani, like 40 kilometers from the Suez Canal. Thing is, a larger force would need a large amount of water. So a 12-inch pipeline was laid, and water was pumped forward, and there were storage tanks from where camels could carry water to forward positions. Too little water at Suez, and too much water in Europe. Rains prevented any big action at Verdun in the west, and the Eastern Front was still flooded. Though on April 28th, German artillery began a bombardment of the area near the village of Stavaroche. Back on March 20th, the Germans had lost a series of important trenches there, and a strong attack was now launched to regain the ground. And they captured not only the territory in question, but went on to take a series of Russian trenches. Losses were high on both sides, but became higher for the Russians when they made a night counterattack in the face of machine guns. Now, I don't know the numbers killed or wounded, but the Germans took 56 officers and 5,600 men prisoner, as well as 28 machine guns and 5 big artillery pieces. And that was the week. A quiet and wet Europe, desperation in Mesopotamia, and action off the English coast. National borders, in much of the world, are often natural boundaries, or have developed over the centuries between ethnic groups and different peoples or tribes. But the partitioning of the Middle East ignored this and was completely fabricated from thin air in straight lines. These boundaries and the failure of the Allies to keep their promises of liberation have, in large part, led to 100 years of conflict, violence, and death in the whole region. That's beyond the scope of this channel, though, but it serves as a huge example of the fact that the horrors of a war are never restricted to the boundaries of that war and have far-reaching consequences that can affect the lives and deaths of millions of people decades or even centuries after that war is over. War is hell. As I said earlier, the Irish Easter Uprising also shook things up on the British Isles this week. Now, it is an extremely important event, not only for the Irish, but with a lot of ramifications for the rest of the world. So we made a whole special episode about it, and you can check that out right here. Our Patreon supporter of the week is Carl Willier. Help us out on Patreon to make our show even better with new formats and greater and better and more animations. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.